Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would review this series of videos that I thought would be very particularly interesting. And, of course, for those of you that did not end up seeing the fight tonight, or technically yesterday because I'm doing this quite late. But, of course, Mr. Canelo Alvarez, he was able to retain, I believe, his titles against Mr. Edgar Berlanga, or Berlanga, however you personally pronounce his name, which of course pretty much was expected by that of the boxing world because Edgar Berlanga, of course, he's not looked at as a quote unquote A grade level fighter. And there's always a little bit of a debate about who is a quote unquote A grade level fighter. I've already stated that in my personal view, that when it comes to Canelo, that he has 11 A grade total wins in his career. Those wins, in my view, would consist that, I believe, if I can remember all of them right now, the first one that I think that he got was Austin Trout, then Lara, which of course was a very competitive fight, but of course they ended up giving the split decision to Canelo Alvarez. Then after that, Miguel Cotto. After that, Gennady Triple G Golovkin. After that, I cannot remember exactly who he fought after that. That would have been the other A-grade fighter. Maybe Callum Smith after that, who I counted as an A-grade level fighter. Billy Joe Saunders, the sixth one. The seventh one, Caleb Plant. The eighth one, Sergey Kovalev. The ninth one, Danny Jacobs. The 10th one, Jamel Charlo. And the 11th one, Jaime Munguia. Those are the 11 A grade level wins that I would say are in Canelo Alvarez's career. But of course, when it comes to Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation and a lot of these LDBC and new media channels, but Dante's Boxing Nation and AKHi TV especially, they of course have to try to tear down Canelo Alvarez at every turn, and they've been doing this, at least Dante, he's been doing this now for the past 10 plus years. Because Dante's, a big part of his objective once again is to make sure that you remember certain fighters of this generation like Canelo or Usyk or Tyson Fury or Golovkin or Lomachenko as quote unquote more hype than what they were reality. Now, at times, some of those fighters could have been quote unquote overrated, or some of those fighters, did not quite have the resume to be as highly ranked as maybe what they were. But when you talk about certain guys that have great results, like that of a Usyk or like that of a Canelo Alvarez, you have to give those guys their respect. And you have to take a look at those guys, even though there might be a slight racial motivation and why certain people overall try to rank them so high. You have to take a look at it and say, okay, you know what? Is there actually some substance here? And the thing is with Dante and people like Aki TV is that they don't really have that ability. Their whole narratives are completely racially driven. And this is why I always like to review the videos, and I like to state that you have to be very careful with who you trust. You have to be very careful overall, once again, with what narratives you believe. You have to have actually have been there and actually done the research and watched the fights and certain sporting events. Because once again, as overall certain philosophies say, oftentimes, I believe that there was a great quote actually overall, that I read not too long ago where it said overall, a lie overall, could run halfway across the world before the truth even gets on its shoes. Basically meaning that lies and narratives spread much more quickly than that actually of the quote unquote truth. Now, the truth is, I guess, to a degree, depending on the situation, somewhat subjective, depending on your perspective. For example, in boxing, what you look at as a quote unquote A grade level fighter or something of a sort, how important those accomplishments you find them to be. But at the end of the day, just my personal perspective, as I've always said about Canelo Alvarez, he is debatably the greatest fighter of his era. He's right there with Crawford, he's right there with Usyk, but the one thing that in my view that is not debatable is that in my view he clearly has the best resume out of all boxers of the past 10 years. He has a better resume than Crawford. He has a better resume than Usyk. He has a better resume than Inoue. He has a better resume than all those guys. And people can like it, they can not like it, but it is what it is. Now, does that mean that Canelo Alvarez, that he has not had certain criticisms in his career, such as overall maybe not trying to make the David Benavidez fight, or at certain times, maybe he could have tried harder to make the Andrade fight, or of course, he got popped for clenbuterol and PEDs at one point in time. Of course, Canelo is not without some of his criticisms. But if we're going to be fair to the man, once again, Canelo Alvarez clearly is an all-time great fighter. And he's a fighter overall that when you take a look at it, yes, he has the best resume of his day. And I just don't think that that's really debatable. But that's not going to stop Dante's Boxing Nation nor Aki TV from trying to tear down Canelo Alvarez, because once again, Canelo is one of the all-time great fighters. And when you take a look at Canelo Alvarez, just in my personal view, if you're asking me where personally would I rank him, he probably would be, at the very least, within my top 20 fighters of all time. Because in my view, he's above certain fighters like Oscar De La Hoya and Juan Manuel Marquez and Miguel Cotto and Sugar Shane Mosley. I kind of have all those fighters within the same realm, who are multiple weight division champions, but not quite as great as what a Canelo Alvarez is, in my personal view. And the proof of that is that Canelo Alvarez not only one time was debated as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, but once he started moving up the weight classes, he could actually beat some very skilled and A-grade level fighters that not only were the same size as him, but were actually bigger than him. And that's one thing that Canelo Alvarez, in my view, always gets a decent amount of credit for. I don't think that he gets quite enough credit for that. But, it is what it is. But anyways, Dante's Boxing Nation, once again, what he's going to try to make you believe is that Canelo Alvarez, that not only is he not an all-time great fighter, but that overall, that in terms of Mexican history, that he's not above certain fighters like Marco Antonio Barrera, Eric Morales, or Juan Manuel Marquez, etc., or Oscar De La Hoya. And let me just tell you this very bluntly and very simply. Canelo is above every single one of those fighters. He's above every single one. There's no way that you're going to logically sit here and tell me that Oscar De La Hoya, who lost the majority of the big fights in his career, or Eric Morales, who lost to Marco Antonio Barrera twice, and also lost to Manny Pacquiao, and got the shit kicked out of him twice, and other fighters as well, and Marco Antonio Barrera, that lost to Junior Jones, I believe. Manny Pacquiao was never considered the #1 pound-for-pound fighter of his era, and I also believe that, I'd actually have to take a look and see how many divisions that Barrera and Morales were champions in. I thought maybe it was about 3. But I can't remember. And Marquez, of course, all-time great fighter as well. But in my view, even he is not quite on the same level as Canelo. Like I said, when you talk about Mexican fighters, there's only one Mexican fighter that, in my view, is on the same level as Canelo, at least in terms of greatness. It's Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. That really is the only fighter that I would consider on the same level as Canelo Alvarez. Now, of course, some people would also mention Salvador Sanchez, and I get it, the man was extremely skilled. But Salvador Sanchez, at the end of the day, unfortunately, he just was not accomplished enough, in my personal view, to be as high as some of those guys. And at the end of the day, at least for my ranking list, you can be as skilled as what you want to be. But if you don't have the resume, if you don't have the accomplishments behind your name, then in my view, it just doesn't matter really a whole lot. Now, Salvador, he's up there in terms of my all-time great fighters. But can I really put him in my top 10 because, unfortunately, he did have a very early demise? No, I can't put him within my top 10. I just can't do it. Not personally, but it is what it is. But anyways, once again, Dante and AKHi TV, they're going to do their best, to do basically their hash job on Canelo Alvarez because they know that that's what they're going to need to do in order to make Terrence Bud Crawford look like he's the clear greatest of this era and that there's no comparison. And there is a comparison because Terrence Bud Crawford, even though, yes, you could debate him as greater than Canelo, or you could debate him as the best of this generation over Canelo, or the greatest over Canelo for this generation, Canelo was right there in the debate as well. And AKHi TV and Dante, they're going to try to make it seem like it's not a contest. It is. And not only is Canelo and Crawford in there, but Usyk is in there as well. You have to, put those 3 fighters in the conversation because those are the 3 fighters that in terms of skills and accomplishments and what they were able to do, they were able to do things that no other fighters of their era were able to do. Now, Inoue, of course, is kind of right there alongside them, but he's a little bit of an intermediary. He's not quite, overall, once again, completely with them. He still has a little bit more to prove, as he's only 30 years old. So we'll see what happens. But anyways, this era is coming to an end. And I do think overall that Canelo Alvarez, that it is almost about time for him to retire. To be quite honest with you, even that Canelo Alvarez retired after this fight, I would have not been surprised. But it appears that Canelo Alvarez still wants to accomplish a little bit more in his career. But at the end of the day, it's very clear that Canelo Alvarez is aging as a fighter. But we're going to talk about that overall as it goes along. But Canelo, Crawford, Usyk, those guys do not have much time left. So it's very close to the end of this era, as I've been stating for a very long time. But anyways, let's get into it. Let's see what these guys have to say.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? Okay, so during the fight between Canelo and Edgar Berlanga, Julio Cesar Chavez, he was there watching the fight live, and in between rounds, they interviewed him. And Julio Cesar Chavez, he said that Puerto Rican fighters are not good at all. They just talk a lot. End quote. Now, for Chavez to say something like that, not only is he telling you what he thinks about Puerto Rican fighters, but he's also telling you what he thinks about Canelo in general. That was his nice way of saying that Canelo Alvarez is doing nothing but cherry picking, choosing opponents.
I mean, that might have been his way of saying that. You know, I don't know. I feel like Dante is going for his regular reach, 1,000 overall once again to try and twist this in a bad way for Canelo. Now, that being stated, Edgar Berlanga is not an A-grade level fighter. This is not the fight that everybody was asking for. Of course, the fight that everybody wants to see is that of the David Benavidez fight. But to be quite honest with you, I'm not sure if that fight's going to happen because A, it seems like David Benavidez has finally fixed his sights on the 175-pound weight class. And to be quite honest with you, Canelo Alvarez, I'm not really quite sure if he has any business being in the ring with the guy that pretty much is going to be a light heavyweight fighter, you know, in the ring with him. And he's pretty much a middleweight fighter, Canelo Alvarez, you know, so we'll see overall what ends up happening. Now, of course, if David Benavidez and if, what's his name, David Morrell, if those two fighters, you know, if they end up at the 168-pound weight class, then, of course, Canelo Alvarez, you know, should have to fight them, you know, because there is quote-unquote mandatories. But at the end of the day, you know, overall, if they're going to remain at the light heavyweight class, I don't really know where Canelo Alvarez is going to go. You know, there's only so many more fights that, to be quite honest with you, that Canelo Alvarez, that he's going to be able to do that that the fans are really going to be able to put up with because, you know, David Benavidez is the fight that everybody wants to see.
Opponents that are not good at all. That's his way of saying something about Canelo Alvarez while staying on Mexican code. Canelo Alvarez.
Well, in my view, is Chavez's way of hyping up the Mexican versus Puerto Rican rivalry and also kind of reflecting on his time, especially against Hector Macho Camacho, who, in my view, although somewhat of a great fighter, one of the more overrated fighters within history, Hector Macho Camacho. But, you know, when it came down to it overall, you know, in my view, it was really more Chavez just trying to hype it up, trying to hype up the Mexico versus Puerto Rican rivalry. But who knows? It could have been a subliminal way, you know, of Chavez basically insulting Canelo Alvarez's competition.
As he went 12 rounds, he went the distance with the weakest level of opposition that he has faced since he lost to Bivol. Then something that was real funny happened. After the fight, Canelo, he did his post-fight interview, and he said, I fought a young guy. You guys said I won't fight a young guy. I only fight old guys. So no matter what I do, you guys are not happy. Then he said
Well, I agree with you, Canelo Alvarez, that at the end of the day, you are an all-time great fighter. So you're going to have a lot of people, a lot of haters that are never going to be satisfied with whatever you're going to do. But at the end of the day, Canelo Alvarez is also keep it a buck. Let's keep it real. At the end of the day, this is not the fight that anybody was asking for. Everybody was asking for that of David Benavidez. So let's keep it real. You knew damn well that this is not the fight that anybody was asking for. You know, and you said that you're looking for fights that are quote-unquote legacy. Well, at the end of the day, Edgar Berlanga, you know, it's a cute little fight. It's a fight that might be entertaining to certain people, especially if you like watching Canelo. But at the end of the day, it's not the fight that everybody wanted to see. The fight that would have been the quote-unquote legacy fight would have been that of David Benavidez.
he's the best fighter in the world. Canelo knows nobody was asking him to fight against Edgar Berlanga, including Mexican fans. The whole reason why Chavez is staying on code because he doesn't want the backlash from the Mexican fans that are extremely loyal to Canelo. I mean, because when you compare Canelo Alvarez to all of the other Mexican fighters, from Chavez to Marco Antonio Barrera, Juan Manuel Marquez, Oscar De La Hoya, they all fought way better competition than Canelo consistently, on a consistent basis. Canelo, he's now...
No. No, they didn't. But once again, Dante's Boxing Nation, basically what that's his way of doing is that's his way of trying to plant that seed into the minds of most people that Canelo Alvarez is not above certain Mexican fighters like Marco Antonio Barrera and Marquez and blah, blah, blah. And basically he's using the same tactic that Floyd Mayweather Jr. haters used to use because he can't logically explain overall how those fighters would really be over Canelo Alvarez unless he just tries to make you believe like Canelo Alvarez has been ducking the best of the best for his whole entire career. And like I said, when we talk about that, when you talk about his quote-unquote resume, you know, you're talking about, once again, he beat Austin Trout when he was coming off the win over Miguel Cotto and a champion. You know, so that had to be counted at least as an A- level win. He beat Araceli Lara when Lara was basically an undefeated fighter because the only loss in his career at that time was the complete robbery over Paul Williams. You know, he was coming off the victories over Alfredo Angulo and that of Austin Trout. So Lara was looked at as a very dangerous contender, and Canelo got the slight nod over Lara, so that had to be considered as an A-grade level win. Then, of course, after that, he was able to beat Cotto, when Cotto was a bit older, but also a little bit refurbished by Freddie Roach and the WBC and ring middleweight champion of the world. That's when Canelo was able to defeat Cotto, okay? And then, of course, after that, he was able to defeat Gennady Golovkin when he was looked at as one of the top 5 pound-for-pound fighters in the world. So that has to be considered as an A-grade level win. After that, of course, he was, I believe, able to defeat that of Danny Jacobs when he was able to beat Sergey Derevyanchenko, and was able to win the IBF title. And he beat Sergey Derevyanchenko when he was undefeated, by the way. You know how these LDBC and new media guys, they try to use Jamal Charlo's name, in order to tear down Canelo Alvarez. You know, they love the circle jerk about how Jamal Charlo looks so impressive over Sergey Derevyanchenko. But Danny Jacobs was allegedly out of his prime at 30 to 31 years old, and he was the first one to defeat Sergey Derevyanchenko for the IBF middleweight title. Like I'm supposed to believe that shit. Anyway, so yeah, that was his 5th A-grade level win. And then after that, of course, you had Callum Smith, who won the Super 6 Series tournament at 168 pounds, and he was able to knock out George Groves and Rocky Fielding. And the George Groves win was especially impressive at that time because no one, I believe, was going to have the capability to knock him out like that except Callum Smith at that time. And he was a legitimate Super WBA champion at that time, and the Ring Magazine champion, and a guy that really is a light heavyweight. People trying to make him seem like he was just some complete bum. No, he wasn't. Now, was he a little bit of a stiff British fighter? Yes, but he still had great athleticism and great talent. So people keep trying to say that it was just a complete bum-ass win. No, it wasn't, because if Charlo or Andrade had got that win, they would be circle jerking over it. Dante and all these other guys, they'd be saying how big of a win it was. So please, it is what it is. So that was the 6th A-grade level win of his career. Then, of course, Sergey the Crusher Kovalev. Not quite the same Kovalev, of course, that he once was against Andre S.O.G. Ward, of course. But of course, Sergey the Crusher Kovalev, he was coming off of 2 wins over Eleider Alvarez and Anthony Yarde, 2 of the best fighters there, 2 of the best top contenders. Now, was he as strong as Bivol or better Beav at the time? No, of course not. But Sergey the Crusher Kovalev still was a light heavyweight fighter. He still was an A- level champion. Canelo was able to defeat him. So that was the 7th A-grade level win. He was able to defeat Billy Joe Saunders when he was a 2-weight division champion, and a guy that was, once upon a time looked at as one of the best middleweights in the world. Remember, Dante's Boxing Nation and these guys, they said that Saunders versus Andrade was one of the biggest fights in boxing. Andrade, the same guy that apparently is going to embarrass Canelo Alvarez. But then when Canelo fights him, it's a quote-unquote cherry pick. That's what they said. When it came down to it. So that was the 8th grade level win in his career. And then, of course, you have Caleb Plant, who was undefeated and defeated Jose Uzcategui, who knocked out one of the Durrell brothers. That was his 9th A-grade level win. Then you're talking about Jamel Charlo, who really should be fighting at middleweight anyway. Same with Canelo Alvarez, and and he was undisputed in that weight class, at 154. And Canelo Alvarez beat the shit out of him. Remember when Jamel Charlo was allegedly top 5 pound for pound, but now you don't hear anything about him anymore from these guys. Remember, Canelo Alvarez is such a one-dimensional, limited fighter, and, it's going to be an easier fight, allegedly, than Brian Castano. But then Canelo Alvarez whooped his ass for every single round, and now all of a sudden it's because of the size differential, even though Jamel Charlo rehydrated heavier than him on fight night, and Jamel Charlo is, 6 foot, get the fuck out of here. And then, of course, you have Jaime Munguia, who was a champion at 154 at one time. And by the time that he fought Canelo, really should have been fighting at 168 pounds. And, of course, was able to add on to his skill set a little bit, by getting Sergey Derevyanchenko in a fight, in a very close fight, but one that he just edged out. And then, of course, overall, once again, the fight against, what was his name? John Ryder, But anyway.
34 years old. I remember when Canelo was fighting against soft competition, and some of his Mexican fans, they would say, well, Canelo is still young. When he gets more in his prime, when he gets a little older, that's when he's going to step up in competition. And now at age 34, he's fighting Edgar Berlanga, Jaime Munguia, and John Ryder. I've already told you guys what his trainer, Eddie Reynoso, said. I made a video on it. Eddie Reynoso, he said that Canelo Alvarez, now at this age, we have to match him carefully, as if this is something that they just start doing. Like I said before, I don't even care who can.
Well, once again, let me let me also intervene a little bit here, because Dante's Boxing Nation keeps trying to act like Canelo Alvarez has just fought nobody throughout his whole entire career. And of course, for those of us that really know what's going on, we all know that that's bullshit. But once again, Dante has to try to make it seem that way, because Dante's whole objective is that he doesn't want someone like Canelo Alvarez or a non-black fighter to be remembered as the best of this generation. He can't allow that. Now, if you want, once again, if you think that Crawford is the greatest of this generation, you're certainly entitled to that opinion. You have a great debate for that. He's definitely up there. At the end of the day, the man is undisputed in 2 weight classes. He's undefeated. He defeated Errol Spence Jr. He defeated Israel Madrimov when he was looked at probably as an A- level fighter. He defeated Victor Postol, Yuriorkis Gamboa. But the thing is that when you take a look overall once again with Canelo Alvarez and Terrence Bud Crawford, it's a little bit hard to compare their careers, because there's no offense against Crawford, but other than those 5 fighters, who really were those A-grade level wins? Like, people always try to sit here and say about how Canelo Alvarez fought guys, quote-unquote, out of their prime and all this other bullshit. Well, what about Terrence Bud Crawford fighting Sean Porter when he was no longer a champion and already suffered about 3 losses in his career? Are we going to mention that? Are we going to mention how Crawford fought a Yuriorkis Gamboa that never belonged at 135 pounds in the first place and was coming off of a year layoff? Are we going to mention that? Are we going to mention how he fought Victor Postol, who of course had the great win over Lucas Matisse? But I mean, give me a fucking break. I mean, Victor Postol, it's not like he's this world beater. He pretty much is another stiff European fighter. So I mean, like, you know, and I think that's still an A- level win at that point in time. But don't sit here and tell me that Victor Postol is like better than that of a Billy Joe Saunders or a Caleb Plant. Like, please.
Canelo fights anymore. He can fight whoever he wants. Just don't hold up all the belts and move out the way so the fighters who really want to prove that they're the best can fight against each other. With that being said, I'm a wrap.
You know, let me rewind that part, actually.
On it. Eddie Reynoso, he said that Canelo Alvarez, now at this age, we have to match him carefully, as if this is...
And once again, I do agree overall with that point that Canelo Alvarez, that if he is going to retain the titles at 168 pounds, that he should be forced to fight the guys that are going to remain there and be the best there. And if that's David Morrell and David Benavidez, then, you know, it is. But once again, Canelo Alvarez, he might have to start thinking about hanging him up. Because like I said, in this fight, he just looked old to me. And he's only 34 years old. You know, I had this one commenter, Mr. Dontra, who loves to, who obviously is Canelo Alvarez's #1 fan. But, you know, he stated overall that, you know, you're stating that Canelo Alvarez is old. But you didn't say the same thing with Terrence Bud Crawford, you know. No, actually, I did state that Crawford, that he's about 37 years old right now. You know, and of course, you know, age is a little bit of a factor. So in his Israel Madrimov fight, I'm not really quite sure why he wasn't as impressive. Maybe it was because of Madrimov's style. It also could have been a mix because of him moving up in weight, and also because Crawford is 37 years old, or, you know, probably a mix of all three, you know. But it's harder to judge Crawford's career once again because his level of competition just was not quite on the same par as Canelo. And I know that some people, once again, that they're going to get angry with that, but it is what it is. You know, at the end of the day, Canelo Alvarez, he has several more A-grade level wins in his career than Crawford does. Just is what it is.
Something that they just start doing. Like I said before, I don't even care who Canelo fights anymore. He can fight whoever he wants. Just don't hold up.
Dante, not only do you care about who Canelo Alvarez fights, you care about what happens with Canelo Alvarez no matter what. Dante's Boxing Nation has the same relationship with Canelo Alvarez as Skip Bayless does with LeBron James, or that Shannon Sharp does with Michael Jordan or Tom Brady. Like, get the fuck out of here. Like, this dude always finds a way to mention Canelo Alvarez. Like, the conversation could be about anything. Like, Dante's Boxing Nation could find a fly in the room or a cockroach, and he could say, oh, man, that fucking fly, you know, overall, you know, just being the pest that it is, you know, flying in this room. You know who else is a pest? Canelo Alvarez. Like, Dante always finds a fucking way to turn the conversation around and always talk about this man, Canelo Alvarez. But that's, once again, that's how you know, the level of respect that they hold you in. You know, the people overall that can't stop talking about you, they hold you in high regard.
All the belts and move out the way so the fighters who really want to prove that they're the best can fight against each other. With that being said, I'm going to wrap this video up. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one. All right, now check this out.
But once again, that's pretty much about it for the Dante's Boxing Nation part of it. Or at least overall with that part of the video. We're going to review another little video of his, and then we're going to move on to Mr. AKHi TV. Okay, so this is going to be Dante's little review of Canelo versus Berlanga, and let's see overall what he has to say.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So Canelo Alvarez, he goes 12 rounds with Edgar Berlanga. He wins a unanimous decision in a fight that was a little bit more competitive than a lot of people expected. That's 6 straight fights in a row for Canelo where he goes the distance and doesn't get the knockout. But I kept telling you guys leading up to this fight, with this level of opposition that Canelo was in the ring with, this fight shouldn't have went more than 3 rounds, which coincidentally...
And of course, I was Dante's Boxing Nation's way. Like I said, overall in my fight build-up, or within my fight preview, or prediction, that was Dante's way once again to basically trying to diminish Canelo Alvarez as much as possible. He knew damn well that Canelo Alvarez at this age, at 34 years old, fighting for 18 and 19 years, he wasn't going to knock out Edgar Berlanga, someone that clearly is bigger than him and someone that, overall still is relatively talented. Not greatly talented, but relatively talented. Someone that's still a solid B grade level fighter. He wasn't going to knock him out overall within no damn 3 rounds. Like, come on. But, it is what it is.
Canelo Alvarez, he did knock down Edgar Berlanga.
And, once again, like one of the commenters, Mr. Dontre, he said, well, you're saying that Canelo Alvarez, is basically about, 37 to 38 years old. That must mean that Crawford is about 45 years old. Well, that doesn't make any fucking sense, because the reason why that doesn't make any sense is because Terrence Bud Crawford has been fighting now for about, 17, 18 years maybe? Probably not even that long, more like probably 16 professional years. I would have to take a look at it. People don't understand that Canelo Alvarez, that he's been fighting ever since he's been 15 years old. Canelo Alvarez is now in his 19th year of professional boxing. And not only is he within his 19th year, but when you talk about any other fighter for the past 10 years, he's had clearly overall the most amount of A-grade level fighters on his resume out of any other fighter. It just is what it is. And people can take a look at Crawford's resume and they can say like, oh, that's not true. Listen, at the end of the day, Crawford, once again, I give him credit for Gamboa. I give him credit for Postal. I give him credit for Madrimov. I give him credit for Spence. And I give him credit for Porter. Those are the 5 A-grade level wins in his career. None of those other wins in his career are A-grade. Raimundo Beltran is not an A-grade level fighter. Ricky Burns and Julius Ndongo, Jeff Horn, those guys are not A-grade level fighters. When you talk about those guys are not A-grade level fighters. All right? And of course, people also want to bring up Kell Brook and Amir Khan. Isn't it so interesting how these same guys, they claim that Canelo Alvarez beats guys when they're quote unquote out of their prime, even though they were champions when Canelo Alvarez had fought them. But Crawford, he beat a very good version of Kell Brook and Amir Khan. Like, get the fuck out of here. Like, Kell Brook and Amir Khan, by the time that Crawford fought them, their souls were done. They were nowhere near championship level fighters. Like, at least when Canelo fought Cotto and Kovalev, they actually held titles.
In the 3rd round. Canelo, he feinted to the body and then came up top. But credit to Berlanga for not only surviving the knockdown, but becoming even more resilient as the fight went on. When Edgar got caught with the left hook, he was on the ropes. Edgar, he made sure he didn't get caught with that left hook again, especially on the ropes. Now, Edgar, he showed a decent jab in this fight. He landed some good right hands, a couple of hooks and uppercuts. And Canelo Alvarez was showing a lot of respect for Edgar. Now, it's funny because once this fight went past 3 rounds, once it went way past 3 rounds, I said, man, if this fight goes the distance, that's a moral victory for Edgar. And then in the 10th or the 11th round, Joe Goosen, who was covering the fight, or one of the people covering the fight, he corroborated that exact point. And he said it. He said, this is a victory for Edgar if this fight goes the distance. So Jim Gray, he interviews Canelo Alvarez after the fight, and he's talking to him like this was a massive, very impressive performance. Jim Gray, he said something like you walked him down and destroyed him. He was talking about how impressed he was with Canelo's punch stats in the fight. Now, we all know if it was a Terrence Crawford or a Gervonta Tank Davis fighting an Edgar Berlanga type of opponent, and it went the distance, that...
Well, it's no offense against Gervonta Tank Davis, but if we're going to bring up his name, that's really all the type of opponents that that Gervonta Tank Davis fights. Like, Dante sits here and he tries to overall tell you, like, Gervonta Tank Davis is actually legitimately facing top-tier level competition. Dude, like, this fight that Canelo Alvarez just recently had with Edgar Berlanga, that's basically every single fight that Gervonta Tank Davis is in. Except these guys, like, they're not legitimately bigger than him usually, like what some of the fighters that Canelo Alvarez has fought at 168 pounds. At the end of the day, it's like, come on, give me a break. Like, Rolly Romero, you know, Mario Barrios, Isaac Pitbull Cruz, Hector Garcia. Like, give me a fucking break. Once again, I give him credit overall for Ryan Garcia and what's his name, Frank Martin. I give him credit for those two guys. But all those other fighters is like, come on. Like, for those of us that know boxing, we all knew what those were. You know, they're all little, you know, good little matches against you know, one-dimensional Latino fighters that weren't ever really gonna have a chance against you. But it's like, come on. You know, I give you credit for Ryan Garcia and Frank Martin. But other than that, nah.
Would be all old media would be talking about is the fight went the distance. It wasn't supposed to go the distance. But I tell you this, man, Canelo.
And let me also state this, you know, because Terrence Bud Crawford, of course, went the distance with Israel Madrimov. And some people, of course, they stated, you know, well, how come you were a little bit critical of Terrence Bud Crawford's performance? Well, I'm also a little bit critical of Canelo Alvarez's performance over Edgar Berlanga. And that's why I say that, in my view, I just don't think that Canelo Alvarez, I just don't think that he's quite really at his peak anymore. But the thing is with Crawford is that it's always going to be a little bit harder to judge him because I don't think that Crawford has ever usually been in a ring with a fighter that's been legitimately bigger than him. When you take a look at Canelo Alvarez in the ring against Golovkin and Berlanga and, you know, Jaime Munguia and Danny Jacobs and Sergey Kovalev and Callum Smith and Caleb Plant, like those are all fighters that were legitimately bigger than Canelo Alvarez. I don't think that Terrence Crawford has ever really been in the ring with somebody that was quote unquote A grade or someone that was looked at as very decent and someone overall that was actually legitimately bigger than him. I mean, I guess you have Jose Benavidez, but, you know, Jose Benavidez isn't really an A grade level fighter. You know, Israel Madrimov, I think, was girthier than him, but, you know, the reach, you know, which was about a 6-inch reach advantage for Crawford, it pretty much made up for it. And on top of that, he was a bit taller than him. So, I mean, it's harder to judge because, you know, people, of course, will say, well, you know, Canelo Alvarez, you know, he didn't get the knockout over Edgar Berlanga. But the thing is that, you know, Canelo Alvarez is outweighed by Berlanga by at least one solid weight class. Terrence Crawford and Madrimov are pretty much around the same size.
He better stay away from tough competition.
Now, once again, I still give Crawford a little bit of a break for that because he was moving up in weight for the first time, at least to that weight class. And on top of that, the man is 37 years old. So it's not like I can't bring those up as factors. But it is going to be a little bit harder because people, once again, they always try to compare Crawford and Canelo Alvarez's career side by side. Well, it's a little bit hard to do that once again because I don't think Crawford has ever been in a fight where he's fought a legitimate A-grade level fighter and they've been at least a weight class bigger than him, you know, like what a Danny Jacobs was over Canelo, or probably what a Caleb Plant was over Canelo, or a Jaime Munguia was over Canelo, or Sergey the Crusher Kovalev, who was probably about a weight class and a half or 2 weight classes over Canelo. Crawford has never really been in a fight like that.
Stay away from fighting the best because he's going to have a third loss on his record if he does. With that being said, I'm going to wrap this video up.
And Canelo Alvarez, I'm not really quite sure what he's going to do with this again moment in time because, you know, I don't know. I mean, he might retain the belt of 168. I would actually love to see him fight Janabek at the 160-pound weight class, but I don't think that Canelo Alvarez is going to move down to 160 because at this age, I mean, Canelo Alvarez don't feel like trying to lose the extra weight or putting in the extra work to get down all the way to 160 pounds. He's at a comfortable weight, but the thing is that Canelo is not really a natural 168-pounder. He can't lose really any more weight because of his age, but at the end of the day, Canelo Alvarez really doesn't belong there. So the thing is that I'm not really quite sure what's going to happen. And once again, Canelo, he does clearly look aged as a fighter.
That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one.
But anyways, that pretty much is about it for this part. Once again, let's go to Mr. AKHi TV and see what he has to say. Okay, so let's see what my man here, Mr. AKHi TV, has to say about Canelo Alvarez.
Say it ain't so. Congratulations to Edgar Berlanga for his moral victory, going 12 rounds with Canelo Alvarez. Everyone had Canelo Alvarez knocking out Edgar Berlanga. I'm talking about early too, but surprisingly...
No, not everyone had Canelo Alvarez knocking out Edgar Berlanga early. And for those of us, once again, that know professional boxing, especially seeing Canelo Alvarez's age, we didn't predict a super early knockout because, once again, you know, we know where Canelo Alvarez is at this point in time in his career. But of course, instead of mentioning the amount of years that Canelo Alvarez has fought and his age, you're going to see what AKHi TV once again is going to try to pull.
Edgar Berlanga surpassed all of the expectations. He didn't just manage to survive.
He didn't really surpass my expectations. Edgar Berlanga pretty much did what I thought that he was going to do. which is pretty much not be able to find out what to do once Canelo Alvarez really showed, his elite level boxing ability. There's going to be some moments where, of course, he got hurt in the fight. There's going to be some moments where I knew that he was going to pressure Canelo because he would basically say, fuck it, what really do I have to lose? But at the end of the day, there was really nothing that majorly surprised me about this fight.
He also fought back, where he managed to land a lot of clean shots on Canelo. Ironically,
well, he landed some. I'm not going to say a whole lot, but he landed some.
Canelo said after the Munguia fight that he carried Munguia the whole fight. He could have knocked him out, but he carried him and lifted him up during the fight. Yeah, cool story.
Well, listen, at the end of the day, we all know that this is a thing with boxers. And this is something that has happened for a very long time. Once again, for example, Manny Pacquiao allegedly wasn't knocking out guys anymore, because he was too religious and, he wanted to be super nice to these guys, that bullshit, We've heard this before with boxers, where, they don't have quite the same athleticism anymore, and, they're trying to fight against the media, who's probably trying to play out a certain narrative, or they realize their age, and the fighters are trying to fight back against that narrative. But it's very clear that Canelo Alvarez is aging as a fighter. He has not quite really been at his peak pretty much ever since the Caleb Plant fight.
Is Canelo trying to convince the fans that he carried Ryder 2 in Mexico? Is Canelo trying to convince us that he carried Edgar Berlanga tonight, even though he promised the fans and Edgar that he was going to knock him out after the 8th round? We all know what time it is. Canelo Alvarez is a limited fighter. He's one-dimensional, and it showed. Edgar Berlanga.
This man, AKHi TV and Dante's Boxing Nation, I swear, man, these guys are the biggest haters of Canelo Alvarez on the planet. And don't get it twisted, once again, Canelo Alvarez at times is deserving of criticism just like everybody else. But at the end of the day, to say that Canelo Alvarez is just a super lit, like, these guys try to act like Canelo Alvarez is like Isaac Pitbull Cruz or something. Like, come on, man. Like, Canelo Alvarez, you can't be 5'7" once again with a 71-inch arm reach and beat guys all the way from 154 all the way to light heavyweight, and be a quote-unquote one-dimensional fighter or someone that is just super limited. Like, come on, make it make sense.
Showed a lot of resistance. I was highly impressed by the fact that he took a lot of clean blows from Canelo Alvarez, didn't fold, then fought.
Like, once again, do you know how easy it would be to conduct a narrative? Say, for example, like if I was a hater of Terrence Bud Crawford, or if I wanted to conduct something about Terrence Bud Crawford and say, oh, Terrence Bud Crawford showed how limited of a fighter that he actually was, because he had a 7-rounds to 5 fight against Israel Madrimov, someone that, was shorter than him overall in terms of reach by 6 inches, and on top of that, the man only had 11 total fights. The man didn't beat any of the top contenders there. It shows how overrated Terrence Bud Crawford is. But come on, man. Like that's the thing with AKHi TV and Dante and these fucking guys. Like, they love to always put the greatest of context, whenever it comes to the fighters that they like. But then when it comes to the fighters that they don't like and that they clearly have to try to tear down, they'll put whatever fucking narrative they need to out there, no matter what the situation is.
Back and actually landed his own on Canelo. At times, Canelo made Edgar Berlanga look like Bivol. The way he was getting in range, then pulling out.
There was no moment in this fight where Edgar Berlanga looked like Dimitri Bivol. At no point in this fight.
Out of range to make Canelo miss his short shots. He took a page out of Bivol's book, but the fact that
he tried his best. But at the end of the day, Edgar Berlanga is nowhere near the boxer, and he's also not the same size as that of a Dimitri Bivol.
Edgar Berlanga was able to pull it off against Canelo and make Canelo look silly at times says a lot about Canelo Alvarez's level. It's not like Edgar Berlanga is this flawless fighter. It more so has to do with Canelo Alvarez being limited. I mean, in the early rounds.
Well, really what this fight has to do, once again, is that Canelo Alvarez is just clearly aging as a fighter. And even in the Jaime Munguia fight earlier this year, I thought that Canelo Alvarez clearly looked slower. I think that his stamina looks even more lethargic than what it did before. And his power, of course, it has decreased a little bit. It just is what it is. You know, Canelo Alvarez is not quite the same fighter as what he once before. And, you know, that's just going to happen. Once again, this is his 19th year in professional boxing. The man is old.
When Canelo was landing his jab, I saw the hook coming a mile away. I already knew he was going to manage to hurt Edgar Berlanga with the hook, which he did exactly that, dropping Edgar Berlanga in the process because Edgar, he kept reaching for the jab, and the jab was still landing anyways. So that set up the hook.
I need to know what fight these guys are watching. Maybe I need to rewatch the fight. Like, these guys are acting like Edgar Berlanga was like out jabbing Canelo Alvarez like the whole entire fight or something. Like, well, like, what fucking fight were these guys watching? Did I miss something?
That's boxing 101. But I was highly impressed that Edgar Berlanga got up and he managed to fight through that as if he never got hurt. He took Canelo punches very well. His punching resistance is what really impressed me. I thought the shots Canelo landed on Edgar Berlanga was going to take him out, but they didn't. And that's how he managed to go 12 rounds, landing his own in the process. So this is a big W for Edgar Berlanga. And a terrible look on Canelo Alvarez's behalf, since Canelo can't even look spectacular nor score a KO against cherry picks.
Well, listen, at the end of the day, Edgar Berlanga, in my view, he's not an A-grade level fighter, but he's a solid B-grade level contender. He clearly is bigger than Canelo Alvarez, and at the end of the day, once again, Canelo is just, he's old as a fighter. He just is, it just is what it is. In my view, Canelo Alvarez, he pretty much did the best that he could. He won every single round against Edgar Berlanga, but once again, the man is old.
This is why Canelo stayed ducking the best fighters in his division, the likes of David Benavidez and David Morrell. This is exactly why. After this terrible performance by Canelo Alvarez, I'm pretty sure his confidence is going to go down even more.
Yo, AKHi TV acts like Canelo Alvarez, like he had a 7 rounds to fight with Edgar Berlanga or something. Terrible performance when Canelo Alvarez pretty much won every single round, if not every single round. Like, come on, man.
Now, his next opposition, his next cherry, is going to be even bigger. We might see Canelo versus Jake Paul and Conor McGregor next year. With that being said, go ahead and drop your...
But anyways, that's pretty much about it. I just thought that those opinions are very particularly interesting. But once again, the reason why they do this, once again, is because they realize that this era is coming to an end. And this is just more propaganda once again, to make sure that they try to make it seem like Canelo Alvarez is not the greatest fighter of this generation. And he debatably is. He's right there with Crawford. He's right there with Usyk. Those 3 fighters, in my view, you have a debate as them being the greatest of this generation. In a way as well, but in a way, in my view, I have to accomplish a little bit more. So we'll see. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see where this goes. And we'll see where Canelo goes, because I'm not quite sure if that David Benavidez fight is really going to be too feasible. I mean, you know, I just don't think Canelo Alvarez, I just don't think at this point in time that, you know, more than likely they're going to match him against someone like a David Benavidez. When he's clearly aging as a fighter. And that being stated, if David Benavidez is going to compete at 168, Canelo is going to have to try to fight him. It is what it is. Because if he's going to fight there, then you're going to have to fight, you know, the top contender there. All right, David Benavidez would be owed that shot. You know, but anyway, that's pretty much about it, though. I just thought that was very particularly interesting. But anyways, we'll see where this goes. But Canelo Alvarez, you know, he might want to call it a day very soon, because in my view, he really only has about a year, maybe 2 left before he pretty much is done as a top shelf fighter. But we'll see what happens. Anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to y'all later.